Yeah, we're live. People are popping in. So I'm gonna kick things off with the intro reel.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses while controlling risk. So if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you a small business owner that's thinking about exiting your business now or in the next few years? My team and I are here to help with our unique zero commission program that we've been using since 2016. We can show you what your business is worth, prepare the package you'll need before you meet your first buyer, even run a confidential online advertising program for you just like business brokers do. And we'll coach you through the whole process, or you can hire us to manage it all for you, including coordinating your whole sell-side deal team. Head over to howtosellmyownbusiness.com to learn about how my team and I can help you get ready by watching a series of videos we prepare that explain each step in detail. And if you're ready or just curious to learn more, reach out to us and we'll get you started or schedule a call to answer your questions. I look forward to meeting you and learning more about your business.
Henry Lopez, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Mr. Barnett. So you're so professional. That intro is it's very intimidating for me.
Oh, you gotta, what is it? Who, not how?
It's good lighting.
I certainly didn't make it. I'll have to say that. We've now you're in Florida. Kevin's also in Florida. He says, good afternoon from Lakeland. Hey, Kevin, how are you today?
Hey, Kevin.
And Victor's also tuning in live from Nottingham over in the UK. Hey, Victor, how are you? Thanks for the like. And I will remind everybody, please give us a thumbs up or a like. It helps the algorithm. Today, we got Henry Lopez, as I said, host of a fantastic program that I've been listening to for years, The How of Business. Henry, for people who don't know you, why don't you give us a quick background on who you are?
Yeah, thank you. I host of the How of Business podcast, just released episode 558 over the past 7 years. In fact, that's how I got to know you. I believe you were a guest, one of my early guests on the show. And I think of myself as a serial small business owner. I've been part of about a dozen businesses now since my first business back in 1991. I was in the corporate world, like a lot of my listeners, and made that transition into business ownership. And so now I'm primarily a business coach in between primary businesses. And of course, the How of Business is a big part of what I focus on now.
And, I was listening to a show of yours at the end of last year. You were doing a sort of a prepare for 2025 kind of program. And you were talking a lot about strategic planning in the world of small business. And I heard the show and I thought, I need to ask Henry to come on and talk about this with my audience, because if there's a thing that I don't often find when I'm talking with a small business owner, it's things like budgets and forecasts, or really a whole lot that looks forward. People are very interested in what has happened. They're talking with their accountant about that, and they're worried about things that are going on right now, and they're always working on their systems or putting out fires and whatnot. But it seems like looking forward into the future seems to be the thing that people always feel that they can put off until tomorrow. And so I thought this conversation about strategic planning would be important. What inspired you to spend so much time thinking about this? Because you actually put a tool together that you use with your clients to help them with this process.
Sure. Well, it's you put it so well. I think it's from having worked with so many clients and they have no plan, right? I think that certainly the people I work with, and I think most people put some semblance of a plan together to launch their business. I think that's been inculcated, a business plan of some sort, some kind of planning. When I help people there, we do a lot of work there with all of that, including the financial projections. But then people get into business, as you know, David, and then it's the battle. They seem to be permanently stuck in that startup phase. Sometimes it's because the business model is broken, separate conversation. But then at the beginning of the year, it's always like, well, I'm just continuing to put out the fires. They never stop to look up and say, where are we going here? And I've often gotten pushback. Well, why plan? It never comes to fruition anyway. And so, okay, that's one reason to maybe evaluate the entire business model. And I get it. We get bogged down in the day-to-day of our business, and we feel like we're not making any progress. But I'll tell you, and you know this, anybody who's successful individually or in business will tell you that part of it is setting goals, setting objectives. And it's not that we always hit that, but we have something that we're driving towards. And so that's why I think it came about and then how do you do that? And so what I broke down in this tool is kind of what should be the components of a comprehensive strategic plan. So I want to start with that because as I've thought about it more and more, I just released this tool, I think it was last year. It can be overwhelming. And so I'm going to release another episode to tell people, listen, it doesn't have to have all of this in it. It's just that when we learn about something, when we break it down, it can seem overwhelming. God, all these steps. You don't have to do all of that. If you haven't done any planning before, at least start with what are your high-level objectives for the year, and that's better than no plan at all.
Okay. And so when you're working with a client, one of your coaching clients, what typically brings them to you? Is it they don't seem like they're making progress, or they're struggling with a particular issue? Can you categorize
Yeah.
the clients in any kind of groups like that?
I have two categories. One is the person who needs the help to get launched, to get that first business started.
Okay.
And they're dealing with a lot of it is dealing with being stuck. They don't know where to go next or how to do it. And the overwhelm that comes from, oh my gosh, I got to do all of these things. But if I look at my client base now, it's mostly made up of existing business owners that are past that startup phase, and now they need to scale and they need some help getting there. And it's a combination of reasons or things that they need, but they're there and they need to take the business to the next level. And that's usually who I'm coaching.
And so taking a business to the next level sounds very forward-looking to me. So is the strategic plan or starting to build on the building blocks one of the first things that you would do often with these clients?
Precisely. In
Okay.
fact, that's one of the first questions I have for them, even as we do the free coaching consultation, as I ask them, what type of a plan do you have? And 9 out of 10 people don't have any semblance of a plan whatsoever. They may have it in their head. They may have some ideas, but nothing that they've formalized.
How many of these people have a written business plan for when they started, but they don't actually remember that they have a plan by the time they talk to you?
Correct. That's the majority of people because, and listen, I'm guilty of this to some extent as well. I think the nature of business planning is such that we use it as a template to get started, and then it gathers dust at best. Yeah. Even though we're told and we say it's supposed to be a living plan, is it really? I don't know. And I think the reality there is that what happens in business is you have all these plans, but then reality sets in as to where you landed with this business and how you had to adjust, right? So I think that's one of the reasons why it gets put aside and then you don't come back to planning.
Okay. Do you mind if I show it on the screen and you can kind of walk us through it?
Sure. Yeah.
Because and this is a download that you have on your website.
Yes, sir.
And sorry, I'm not on the first page. There you go. And we know that nobody can read this, but I just want to show it to people so that you can see that this is like it's not just a planning tool. It's like a step-by-step. This is what you do in order to do this. So you want to walk us through this?
Sure. Yeah. The first step is obvious. You got to review the previous year. So that, and then this spawns other work sometimes. Part of that is reviewing your financial statements. And if you don't have that, well, we need to start there. Right. But let's assume that you've gotten, we're January timeframe and either you or your bookkeeper is close to finalizing your 2024 P&L at a minimum. And then that also then spawns the conversations. Are you looking at it? But nonetheless, how did you perform last year on those key metrics? Revenue, top line revenue, and what did you keep at the end of the day? Operating profit, let's say. You talk about this often. What number are we talking about? Is it after I pay myself or before, and all the benefits that I cover? We can have those conversations. But I like to look at it. How did the business perform separate from everything that you covered from yourself, right? For yourself. Yep. So those two metrics at a minimum, depending on the type of business, we're also looking at what was your gross profits. So those key measures there, but we got to look at what worked well last year, what happened last year, what were your targets that were achieved. That gives us the basis for then what's realistic to set as a goal for this year. So that's where we start. Then vision and mission, it's often, this is again, do you even have one? I don't like to get too hung up on this, but really what this is about for me individually as the business owner, whether you communicate this or not, ideally you are with your team and even perhaps with your customers, is this plan that you're putting together for the year needs to be strategically aligned with where you're going in your small business. And for most of us, I think that's a 3 to 5 year horizon, something in that range. Maybe it's where you might start to contemplate an exit, whatever the case might be. So if that's where you want to be 5 years from now, you kind of have to have an idea of what that is. Let's step back and let's make incrementally, let's see, is that realistic that I can be at that number 5 years from now or at that value 5 years from now? What do I have to do this year to get there? And then back to the previous year, if you're telling me I'm going to grow 50%, but I haven't done that historically, let's have a reality check there. What's realistic? How are you going to achieve that? And then the SWOT analysis is completely optional. I think the SWOT analysis is just a classic tool that helps us think about the big picture of the business, or maybe an individual product line or a competition. We can use it in so many different ways to help us think about those 4 components. I just think it's a classic tool. What do you think about the SWOT analysis?
I like it because it makes you stand back and look at the overall thing holistically, what's going on. And I think that people think about these 4 areas all the time, and they're, business owners, when you're driving in the car or walking or just, between appointments or something, you're thinking about these things all together. But rarely do you sit and actually write them down. And I think that the real advantage in a SWOT analysis is probably once you've done this exercise a couple times in a row, and you can, if you want to, line up each successive year's SWOT analysis and start to see what could be changing for you, probably make you feel good about the work that you're doing every day.
Great, exactly. And also the thing that I don't have in here necessarily, but that I think goes hand in hand with the SWOT analysis, especially for the weaknesses and threats. Well, what is your plan? One of our roles as the CEO of the business, as the owner of the business, is to have a plan for if things go badly, right? If interest rates double again, or if there's all kinds of new governmental regulations on my business. I can't control those things, but I can control perhaps what my plan is in case those things do happen, if it's realistically on the horizon. For example, I was in the car wash industry, and that's an industry that's often impacted by water usage regulations, especially in states where that's an issue. And so I can't control that, but I can plan. I can think about how I can impact that. So those are some examples there. And that's that is in there. Step number 4. I didn't even realize it was in there. Or didn't remember that it was in there. So you got to plan about the contingency. How will I deal with those things? Whether you do the formal SWOT analysis or not, it's our job as business owners and CEOs, when we step back from working day to day in the business, is to think a few steps ahead. What if this happens? What if that happens? Determine your strategy. So there's a lot here that you don't want to get too bogged down on. But as I was researching to put this together and this topic of strategy, I came across some really interesting content that I kind of reference here, in particular this book by Roger Martin. He's got a couple of videos online, so I linked to it there, about the difference between just having a plan and a strategy, and what is a strategy. And I have an example there. I won't read it out loud there, but there's an example there of what that means. Again, don't get too bogged down on this. Don't get too frustrated or paralyzed by, oh gosh, what is he talking about here? I want you to take this as a step at a time. You may not complete all of these steps. And if you've never done one before, then you don't need all of this, but at least start to take some steps forward in completing some of these components of the plan. Does that make sense, David?
It does, because I think for somebody who has never done this exercise before, oftentimes they have not also sat and reflected upon the results.
Hmm.
So it's until you start asking questions about what you want to achieve this year, you actually then have to be able to articulate what you did last year.
That's
So
right.
you know if things make sense or not. I've met all kinds of business owners over my career who receive their final year-end package from their accountant, and they kind of gloss through it, but
Right.
they don't sit and look and see how their cost of goods sold changed from one year to the next, or any of those specific things that we might look at when we're examining a business, critically. And if you ask somebody, what do you want to set a goal around cost of goods sold for next year? Like, then they need to know what it was last year.
That's right.
And so
Exactly right.
it kind of forces you to really actually start thinking about how your business is functioning.
Yeah, and measuring those KPIs. If you scroll down a little bit, then the next sections, as I mentioned in that yellow box, there can be combined, and this is where I'm going to do some more work on this, because people kind of get, well, what should be the format? There's no right way to do the format, right? But what I put forward in that yellow shaded box there is that you got to identify what are those KPIs. I mentioned some at the outset here related to the financials, top line revenue, net operating income. At a minimum, we have to have those KPIs, right? But then identify what are those other KPIs related to your strategy. The strategy example that I gave up above that you all can read later is about certain market penetration and being the leader there. So what does that mean? Can I measure market share? Can I measure growth in number of clients? Can I measure user count? What are those key high-level KPIs that I'm going to measure and that I'm going to set as a target for this year? If you haven't ever tracked KPIs, maybe beyond just revenue and profit, don't get carried away here. I would say if you've got a dashboard, and that's just, kind of a metaphor for, you may have a real dashboard or not, a spreadsheet that tracks it is fine if that's what you have in the way of a tool. But I would say, David, 5 to 10 KPIs at the most, and maybe start with 5 to begin with, because otherwise it's overwhelming and it's not really going to help you, right?
Yeah.
And I want you to think about what are those key things that really are impactful that you can control, that you're going to measure and set as a goal for this year.
It's interesting because a couple of years ago, I was preparing a presentation that I did about social media marketing and content marketing, because that's how I do the marketing for my firm.
Mhm.
And I was looking at the history of my YouTube subscribership, and you can go into the back end of YouTube and you kind of see like how it grew over time and stuff. And then I started to think about other social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, and how I was performing on all those. And I began to realize that, of course, as my social media followership was growing, the revenue of the business and the number of people we served was
Mhm.
growing, which just totally makes sense, right?
Right.
But then I asked myself, has the effectiveness or relationship between sales and social media following changed?
Hmm.
And then I started to ask myself some questions I just couldn't answer. And so about a little, I think it was the beginning of 23, we actually started to track,
Hmm.
and this is a weekly thing we do, where we just record the number of LinkedIn followers, Twitter followers, Facebook followers, Instagram followers, YouTube followers, and MailChimp subscribers. And then we look at the sales of like books and online courses and consulting clients, and we measure them in a ratio.
Hmm.
And so what's been very interesting to see over time is just how consistent these ratios are. And so, if we had a dip in sales, one of the first things I would want to look at is what has there also been a dip in, new subscribers or something like that? Like it allows you to examine things in a different way,
Right.
but and I think that would be an example of how KPIs have been implemented in my business.
That's right.
Every business out there has some kind of number. And the big ones we know from publicly traded companies would be like airlines use revenue passenger miles,
Right.
uh, railroads use, tonnage per mile of track or whatever they're doing. Like, and that's the kind of thing you need to figure out for your business, is what is the number you can quickly look at that tells you how you're doing.
And I think that and that's a great point. I think most of us probably know now that we've been running our business, or if it's early on, maybe you don't. Listen, just go to ChatGPT or search online. What are the key KPIs for my particular business? And there they will be, right? And again, start small. But that's a perfect example you laid out. And so if you didn't track that, you wouldn't be able to say, why is our subscriber increase has flattened out for LinkedIn? All right, let's look at what we're doing there. How are people responding to the content? Maybe we need a refresh. But without that, you're navigating blind, right? You don't know, and then you're guessing. And then you're much more susceptible, to stay on the example of marketing, to the next shiny object that comes your way that somebody wants some money to do the next marketing thing, right?
Yeah, if you don't know what's broken, then I don't know, you open a TikTok account. Is that what people do these days?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You do the next thing, right? Because that's what you've heard. Now, the other thing that I've laid out here before you move on there, because I think is critical as a great takeaway, is so key is to have these KPIs. Start small if you've never tracked KPIs, or it will be overwhelming and meaningless. But then lay out what is your action plan to execute on achieving those goals that you set for those KPIs. And I like to break it down by quarter. I think that is one of the keys. Coming back to the point you made about the business plan never getting used again, and the whole thing of the fallacy that it's a live plan. But the only way you're going to make this a live plan in part is to break it down more than just a year. So quarterly, against these annual objectives, what am I going to execute? What are the initiatives? The benefit of quarterly, I have found, is these two things. One is it's a long enough period of time to get something done, but also not too long that I can't pivot and adjust depending on what's happening real time after Q1 in my business, which could entirely mean, hey, I got to throw that plan out the window. I got to readjust. Something has hit me that I didn't anticipate. Yeah. Or I need to fine tune it. And so that quarterly planning is the key, as opposed to having just an annual measure. We got to break that down. What does that mean? How am I going to get there?
Yeah, and instead of waiting until November to realize you're far off track.
That's right.
And I do like calendar quarters, and I know for different industries it could be different. Depending. I know a lot of people in the restaurant industry like to use the week as their cycle. So maybe 5-6 weeks or something is going to be a bit better period for them. I don't know. But definitely you don't want to set goals for a year and then not really be on top of them. I was once in a mastermind group where we had to set a certain number of business and personal goals. And then for the year, and we had to break those down into quarterly, and it allowed us to really keep on top of each other and hold each other accountable, because we required monthly reporting towards the goal of the quarterly goal. And when someone starts to slip, it's pretty easy to see, 5 or 6 weeks into a quarter, if something is going to be really off track and you need to seriously take some remedial action to make things happen for yourself.
Yeah. Well said. And to that point, then I think you need to be looking at your dashboard of KPIs at least monthly at a minimum. Yeah. And sure, they're going to start to make more sense as you get more data. As you get to Q1, then they'll start to make more sense, in KPIs more than others. But absolutely, that's the case there. And then you touched on budgeting, which is number 8. Here's my suggestion on budgeting. If you've never done budgeting before, again, don't try to go now start to budget every expense category on your chart of accounts. That's, first of all, it's not necessary, and it's going to be exhaustive. What you want to focus in on are those variable, and to start with, 2 to 5 at the most variable expenses that have the biggest impact and that you can manage. A great example is if you've got any kind of a maintenance budget, or maintenance expense rather, either because you've got vehicles or some kind of a plant or some kind of equipment. And I know that doesn't apply to every business, but just as a good example for us to think about, that's a category where we've got to put a maintenance plan in place. And so that's part of the action item. We have to measure it. We have to set a budget. We need to incentivize those people that are responsible, especially whoever's the manager is, to be motivated to manage to that budget, because he or she's going to get a bonus tied to it. All of those things have to be implemented. That goes back to the action items quarterly, but that's an example of something that I would set a budget to. How do you approach it typically, David?
Yeah, again, it depends on the business. I mean, when you're looking at your overhead expenses, salaries and things, pretty well
Right.
based on the size of your team and if you intend to hire what they're going to look like.
Mhm.
I the cost of goods sold and the gross margin are the two things that I tell people
Yeah,
they have to be most focused on.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, be, especially in today's environment where there have been creeping price increases all over the
Mhm.
place, and sometimes big amounts all at once. I was talking with someone the other day who said certain prices of their costs hadn't moved much in the last year, and then all of a sudden, all the suppliers are
Wow.
moving them like 20%.
Yeah,
And you have to really be on top of that, because if you don't change the way you're pricing, you're going to lose your gross margin.
absolutely.
Um, I, you know, that's the money you have to work with to make your profit with, right? Is the gross margin. And so pricing and making sure there's no waste are the number one things.
Yeah, there's no doubt. So that's a great point, and I kind of glossed over that because I didn't think about it from that perspective. But you're absolutely right. If you're in a business, let's take the restaurant business for example, which I've been in, where food and labor are critical. But let's talk about the food cost in that industry. What you do, what best practices are, and what I did is you're doing everything from we were doing monthly inventory of food, calculating food cost. We had a POS system that tracked all that. The managers were incentivized. That was one of the three components on managing that food cost. And it's something we had to manage very closely. In any other business where you've got any kind of raw materials or components, that's critical. And to your point, I think the biggest flaw is if you're not at least measuring that, by the time you realize what's going on, you've lost a lot of revenue. You may not even recover from that, right?
I
There's also
can
that whole
tell you,
hesitancy of not passing it on in pricing increases, which is a huge mistake. Yeah.
I've seen this in a big way in seasonal businesses. Like
Mm,
there was a golf course client of mine once that had sort of the clubhouse with food service and drinks
mm,
and everything, and they did not have a good system in place. It was mid August before they realized that their margins weren't correct, and of course by mid August
mm.
half the year is gone. So the shot the opportunity to make money that year kind of had already evaporated by the time they knew they had a problem.
So one of the links I have in here is another great book. I know you've spoken to it, and our mutual friend Rocky Lavani
Yeah.
teaches the profit first approach, which is a great way to help with this kind of higher level budgeting. So I have a link to that book there as well.
Yeah. And then you've got, share and get buy-in. Talk a little bit about that, because people have to agree that the plan makes sense, right?
That's right. Yeah. If you've got any kind of a team, if you're at a level now or a type of business where you've got a team, especially if you've got any kind of a leadership team, and we're talking to small businesses here, but you might have those key individuals, your managers. At a minimum, they need to be involved in putting this plan together if it's going to be effective. This can't be a top down, large corporate type approach. Yeah. And even corporations, large corporations that do it well, do it this way. It needs to be collaborative. You've got to get buy in. So work on this together, delegate pieces of it that are specific to a department. If we continue, for example, with the maintenance component of it, and maybe you've got a fleet manager or someone who overruns operations and that's part of their responsibility, have them look at the last year's data and extrapolate what they think they need from a budget this year. They've got to be involved. Your team has got to be involved. It's going to make it a better plan for you. So that's the obvious reason from a owner's perspective. But it's the only way you're going to get buy-in from the team, especially ideally, especially you've been doing this for a little bit, it'll impact people's compensations. So you definitely have to have buy-in so that they clearly understand how this is going to impact not just the company overall, the business overall, but individually for them and their teams, their compensation.
Absolutely. And then number 10, review and adapt.
So at a minimum, on a quarterly basis, you've got to be looking at your strategic plan and saying, where do we need to adjust? What doesn't make sense anymore? What does?
What's that famous boxing quote? Was it Mike Tyson about having a plan until you get punched in the face or something?
Exactly. It's been
Yeah.
mentioned a lot recently, because he's been back in the news when he had that fight with whatever that guy's name is. But yes, that's such a reality of it. It applies to everything in business, doesn't it? Especially when we
Yeah.
first launch a business, we might have grandiose plans, and then bam, the market says, no, we don't want that.
We've got a couple of questions here from viewers. Let's tackle these. This is one I think is good for you. How do you have a sensible plan and make sensible adjustments in the light of experience without being too self-critical?
There's a lot of pieces here. Let's break this down. How do you make a sensible plan and make sensible adjustments in light of experience? I don't know if he means the experience that's happening that we've been speaking to as your year progresses, or if he means your experience that you've had in this or other businesses, whatever it might be. Let's say it's your experiences leading up to this. Well, that's going to be obviously what influences the plan to a big extent. The SWOT analysis might help you surface that experience, let's say, either in the business or because you've done something similar, right? You have a feel for what might or may not happen because maybe you've experienced something similar at a different business that either you worked at or you owned. So that obviously always comes into play. That went away. Did it pop away?
Yeah,
There
sure.
it is. And then without being too self-critical, what do you think he's getting at here?
Well, I think maybe he's thinking that if he looks at what's been going on in the business and he doesn't like what he sees, that
Okay.
he's thinking, taking responsibility and thinking it's got to do with him. But,
Yeah.
I mean, in business, we have a lot of critics. You don't need to add yourself to the pile.
No.
I mean, really, like, you can't do anything about history. You look at what's happened and you learn your lessons and you try to adapt, and then you got to move forward. You can't, stop and criticize yourself. To me, the only thing really that I think you can criticize yourself for is if you realize you have not learned from things that you've done in the past, or you find yourself repeating the same mistake, and then maybe you need to give yourself a little time out and realize you need to change something that you're doing. I don't know. I
Absolutely.
did,
Going back to
did,
the sports analogy, what superior athletes and teams will tell you is they quickly forget that error or that loss or that missed bucket or that missed field goal or whatever it might be, right? They move on. The other thing I'll say to Victor is get some input, get some help from a mentor, a peer, a coach. So get some input to help you with if it's confidence or if it's another set of eyes, that could be the key.
Yeah, I think we actually got the bent here he was headed for. He put a follow-up message there on the screen. We got another interesting one here. This is from Nawaz in Toronto. Hi, how you doing, Nawaz? Can you speak to acquisition strategy as part of growth plans, a so-called roll-up strategy best practices? Well, this is what this channel is all about,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So,
what you're
um,
about, David. So
I
I was
I
smiling because
think
I
it's
know you've got an opinion here.
it's an interesting question because,
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of people who say, "My plan is to buy a business in 2025." And I go, "Great, but you can't really plan for that because there's so many things in
Mm,
that are completely outside of someone's control." What you can plan for is the expense. So he mentioned roll-up strategy. So if you had a business and you were planning to buy another business, you're going to have certain costs. So maybe you have someone on your team who's spending part of their time working on this, doing outreach, etc. You can certainly plan or budget for that. I've worked with companies before that actually had VPs of acquisition where they had somebody who was in the leadership team whose job it was to go out and look at businesses with a view to buying them.
mhm,
Really, all you can do is plan for the expenses of what it's going to take to do that search work. Then, if you happen to do a deal, well, you're just back to the review and adaptation part that you had at the end of your tool there, because
mhm.
everything's going to change. All of a sudden, you're
That's
going to
right.
have the increased revenue and all the other aspects of fitting that new business into the organization.
Yeah, agreed. What I would add to that then is going back to the longer vision. If your longer vision, 3 to 5 years, is if you look at that and say, the only way I'm going to get there is I'm going to have to acquire or open new locations. Give you an example. My first business venture was in the pizza delivery industry. Started with one location, but it has a limited geography, both constrained by the franchise as well as what's realistic to be able to service from a delivery perspective.
Sure.
So for me, as I was looking long term, it had to be additional locations, but those geographies were taken. So I had to take the strategy of buying those other locations. And we then ended up buying one of the two that we were targeted. So that could be part of what you're speaking to as well. Your plan might need to incorporate that in order for us to achieve our growth goals, especially longer term, it might need to mean a new location. And that's where the whole conversation comes into play. Do I build or buy?
Well, and I guess so another thing is that if you never take any time to do any planning, and
Hmm.
then somebody comes along and opens the door to an opportunity for you to do some kind of
Hmm.
acquisition, but you've never really been thinking about it,
Right.
you can waste a whole lot of time.
Hmm.
Then suddenly looking at it and trying to figure out if you want to do it or not.
Right.
Whereas if you have already got this in your plan that you're open to certain kind of opportunities, and maybe you've already sketched out sort of your ideal target, et cetera, it'll make it easier for you to triage opportunities as they come along.
Yeah,
And a lot of people, you know, they don't really believe that opportunities come along, but they do.
they do. Yeah,
If you are, especially if you're already in an industry,
exactly right.
um, when I talk with business owners that want to exit, the very first thing we talk about is who do you know in your industry that may be interested in acquiring? And so people do come out of the blue when you're in business and create opportunities for you to come and look at acquisitions.
Yeah, a perfect example of where this is happening, you see it, is in the home services business, David. If you look at the key large franchise players, for example, that's what they're doing. They're accumulating brands because we understand the value of selling into that same customer base. Hey, I know I serviced you for the garage door, but now I also do power washing and so forth. But to your point, if I'm in the industry, let's say I am a garage door repair business, it's amazing how those opportunities will come your way, or you'll hear of those opportunities that are complementary opportunities to add a business. And you might keep it as a separate brand, or you might fold it into your brand. But to your point, coming back to the strategic planning, is is that where you want to go longer term, that level of growth? And are you open to that might be how you get there? And also
Mm.
realizing the planning is also realizing I'm only going to get so far or get so big with my current offering. How do I grow beyond that realistically?
Yeah. Now, you were talking about this in the fall, this tool that you put together, but I'm assuming you put it together quite some time ago. Is this like an iterative thing that we're looking
Yeah,
at the most
I
recent
I
edition?
put it together, I think, at the beginning of last year because it's something people are, of course, conscious of at the beginning of the year. And then this year, I re-released it as people were getting ready to go into 2024. So
And
that
what
was
sort of feedback have you gotten from people who've used it?
I think generally positive. People appreciate having some kind of approach. I think everybody who plans has positive results. The challenging side of it is what I've mentioned. A lot of people say, God, I don't know where to start, even though I think it's interesting, when we put something together, we think, oh, I've laid it out for you, but it can seem overwhelming, and that's
Yeah.
paralyzed some people. Yeah. So if you're in that category, close the document and just start somewhere. Set yourself some goals at a high level. If you've never had KPIs, identify what are those top 5 KPIs. I've given you examples. David has given you examples, and just put that to paper. This does not have to be, if you don't have the experience doing it, or if it's overwhelming, this big complex document. That's not the idea here. So start small and then add to it, is what I would encourage you to do if this seems overwhelming.
Let's talk about timeframes. When you talk about what someone might want to get done in the next year, there's two ways to go about it. You either
Mm,
look at what you have done and you think of some kind of iterative improvement. Oh, I think I can do a certain percentage better. Or you look long term and say, 5, 10 years from now, I want to be here. What do I need to get done in order to get to that place?
right.
Any particular feedback from you on which method is better, or what do you recommend?
I like the approach of starting with, that's why we start with, what is your vision? Where do you think you want to be now? I say think
Hmm.
because if you're like me, every year my long term vision changes, right? Or it gets adjusted to some extent. I mean, there are some things that stay the same, but then there's a lot of details that change because to your point a moment ago, as we live through life, as we experience in our businesses, things come up that you can't think of right now, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, to answer your question, I like to look at, where am I going long term? What what role does this business have in my overall life plan, and how is it serving that? Now let's work backwards. What incremental step do I need to take in this particular business in alignment with getting me there? Does that make sense?
It does.
So
You
that
talk
makes,
about
because if I do it in an isolation, it doesn't make as much sense, right?
let's talk about life plans because I like to talk about life plans all the time because
Mhm.
I feel that a business is a asset that, allows you to provide for your family. And this all fits into your life plan, right? And the whole buying and selling of businesses, I mean, people sell them a lot of the times because they want to retire or do something else. And so tell me about the whole life plan part. Do you find sometimes with clients you end up doing a little sort of life coaching aside to their business issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's part of it because I think that people kind of lose sight of that, or maybe they've never really thought about it. And often it could be, you and I have talked about this a lot, that sometimes people go into business because of how badly they hate their job, right? But is this really what they want to do, and what is the purpose of it? Or I come across many people who have been slogging away for years, and now they hate it, right? Because it's not working like they used to. They keep having to put money into it. They're starting to hate the work of it. All of those different things. I think that part of it is we have to identify, what are you trying to achieve here? For me, for example, the thing that's always been critical and very clear to me is my freedom of time. Now, that's an obvious one, but time and location. And so if I think back to when I was raising my daughter, I just have one child. She's 26 now, grown and gone. But when I was raising my child, the most important thing for me and my wife was that I was there. I had done a travel career through most of the 90s in sales, and I didn't want that anymore. And that was one of the things that a business had to provide me. Now that meant that I had to compromise on certain things. In other words, I wasn't going to be able to grow or scale at the level that perhaps I could have, because I wanted this value of time, right?
Yep.
And so that's what I mean. That's where it comes back into play. You got to make sure that what you're striving for is an alignment and makes sense for where you want to be in life and what you want this business to provide for you. Am I making sense, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And it changes over time because
It
I
does
mean,
change.
I was in the same boat, when my children were
Mhm.
younger. They were primarily with me after school and everything. So I had to tailor what was going on in my business around my need, initially to go pick them up after school every day.
That's right.
Now, I mean, one of them started driving. Like it's remarkable how much more time I have to work on my business these days.
Right,
But
right.
but yeah, it's got to fit within that overall envelope of your life.
Mhm.
And I find sometimes entrepreneurs don't necessarily articulate or write down the sort of life goals that they have and make sure that the business they are building is, because whether you buy a business or start a business, you're always building a business because these
That's
things
right.
are always iterating and growing over time. Things are changing, etc. Um, and I've seen people, you know, get grow their business to include something new that has a direct impact on their lifestyle, and without ever really thinking about how it was going to impact their lifestyle. They were just
That's right.
said, "Oh, my customers are asking for this. I can make money by selling it. I
Yeah,
should
yeah.
do
Or this
this."
is how we're going to grow. We need to add this. Well, wait a second. Is that really what you want? Is that really what you
Yeah,
want?
yeah,
Here,
and
this is a
sometimes,
topic for a whole nother episode. Where it gets then exacerbated and complicated is if you have a partner or
mm,
partners. So suffice it to say, talk about needing to be in alignment, and what I need from a business versus what you need for the business. And furthermore, our lives are going to change at different paces, right? And in different directions. So it becomes even more critical to do this strategic thinking if you've got a partner, because if nothing else, you're revalidating, are we in alignment with where we're going here? No, no, no,
yeah,
wait a second. I've changed. I'm thinking I want to exit now in a couple of years. Oh, no, no, no. I want to turn this over to my kids. Those conversations should be facilitated by the strategic planning process as well.
yeah, an annual sort of reconvening of all the targets and goals and aspirations of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At a
and
minimum, in a formal way, right? Like we're really going to sit down and talk about this. And it might even get heated. In fact, if it doesn't get heated, you're probably not going deep enough.
yeah, very good. If people in my audience would like to have a copy of this tool, where can they find it, Henry? And where do
Um,
they find you online to learn more about this kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thehowabusiness.com. At thehowabusiness.com, you'll find everything for this particular or any of the other downloads. Just on the menu bar at thehowabusiness.com, go to resources and downloads. And that's where you'll find this tool as well as all of the other tools that I have available there.
Awesome. And, and how have things been going with your podcast? Do you keep track of your downloads? Is that one of your KPIs over there?
It is. Although now we call them listens. Now I'm starting to see that people call them listens because it makes sense. What the heck is a download, right? But you and I know, having been in the podcast world for a while, that's been the term that we've used. So I'm starting to shift to listens. Things are going really well. It's been 7+ years now. Episode 558. You were just recently back on. You're one of the elite group, right? You know how SNL just, we always joke about this. SNL just did their 50th anniversary. You're one of those jacket guys that's been on, I think, 5 times, something like that. But it's been phenomenal. It's been a tremendous opportunity for me, like it has been for you. That's how you and I met and connected. So beyond what it's been able to do to fuel a business, which is a combination of primarily the business coaching that I do, I've gotten to connect and meet so many different people, so many different entrepreneurs, and that's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate the conversations we've had over the years, and I love the topics that you talk about. It truly is the how of business. You talk about how things get done, and you have great guests on as well. And so, anyone out there who's a business owner, operator, is going to find a lot of value over in Henry's show. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you guys all next time. And bye.
Thank you.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.